President Trump's return to the White House, the impact of USAID cuts to the region, and the Cook Islands cooperative agreements with China, and more. Today is February 27th, 2025, and welcome back to Pacific Airwaves, a podcast on the Pacific Islands from the Southeast Asia Program, the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, and the Australia Chair at CSIS. I'm Andreyka in the studio with John Augé from the Australia Chair. Hi, John.
Hey, Andreyka. It's great to be here with you. Since this is my Pacific Airwaves debut, I'd love to start with a brief introduction. I'm currently the Program Manager for the Australia Chair at CSIS, a role I've held for about 10 months. I previously worked at the White House Council on Environmental Quality and the Tuvalu Climate Action Network. I'm excited to join the show, Andreyka.
John brings with him a wealth of experience and interest in the Pacific, so we're thrilled to have him on board. For our listeners who are big fans of Monica Sato, our other co-host, she will be back next month, so don't worry, she's still around and still part of this project. John, we're thrilled to have you here, and I guess we can jump straight into the news making waves in the Pacific.
United States President Donald Trump is back for a second round, and leaders throughout the Pacific have had varied reactions to this familiar yet entirely new administration.
So if we look back, U.S. engagement in the Pacific Islands increased during the first Trump administration, with President Trump beginning negotiations on the renewal of the Compact of Free Association Agreements, or COFA, with countries like the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, and Palau. Trump also hosted leaders from these countries for a meeting in Washington in 2019.
This focus on the Pacific Islands saw an increase under the Biden administration. The administration put out its U.S.-Pacific Partnership Strategy in 2022, hosted 2 U.S.-Pacific Island summits in 2022 and 2023, increased security cooperation with Papua New Guinea, and opened 3 embassies in the Solomon Islands, Tonga, and Vanuatu.
Despite this steady increase in support for the region, Pacific Island countries are cautious about the second Trump administration. This includes Samoa, which has been quite outspoken about the new administration, with Prime Minister Fiame Naomi Mataafa criticizing the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services.
RFK Jr. visited Samoa in 2019 and fueled what Samoans believe to be anti-vaccine sentiments. He visited on a trip organized by an anti-vaccine influencer from New Zealand. The government suspended vaccines for 10 months, and there is controversy that RFK Jr.'s visit led to the vaccine suspension.
And in the period following the vaccine suspension, 83 people, most of whom were babies or children, died due to a measles outbreak. And this is quite a significant number given Samoa's small population of around 200,000 people.
Prime Minister Fiame said that she did not agree with RFK's anti-vaccine rhetoric, and the Samoan Director General of Health, Dr. Alec Ekaroma, stated that RFK downplayed the severity of a measles outbreak in Samoa in 2019.
Beyond vaccines, Samoa has also been quite vocal about President Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement.
Fiame said that U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Agreement is very disappointing, emphasizing it will undermine global climate action and put the survival of Pacific countries at greater risk.
And leaders from countries like Fiji seem to agree. Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka visited Washington in early February as part of the first delegation from the Pacific Islands to visit D.C. since President Trump's inauguration. Rabuka used his trip as a chance to voice Fiji's concerns in its relationship with the United States.
During his visit, Rabuka attended the annual National Presidential Prayer Breakfast and met with Acting Undersecretary of State Lisa Kenna, the Congressional Pacific Islands Caucus, and other members of Congress to discuss bilateral relations.
While this display of diplomacy is great for U.S.-Fiji diplomatic relations, PM Rabuka also had some feedback for the new administration on 3 main points. First, the deportation of Pacific Islanders. Second, environmental concerns. And third, U.S. aid being frozen in the Pacific.
On the first point, Rabuka stressed that the deportation of hundreds of Pacific Islanders with convictions is beyond the capacity for many island nations, with small communities likely to have difficulty absorbing returnees with a history of drug or gang activity.
On climate, the Prime Minister stressed that the Pacific Islands bear a majority of the burden from the effects of climate change, raising concern regarding this administration's lack of climate prioritization. And this ties closely into Fiji's final point of discussion with Washington during the visit, U.S. aid in Fiji and throughout the Pacific Islands.
This is perhaps the biggest development causing concern in the Pacific, the Trump administration's foreign aid freeze. One of the many executive orders signed by President Trump on his first day in office on January 20th was titled Reevaluating and Realigning United States Foreign Aid, which ordered a 90-day pause on all foreign development assistance programs while the administration undertakes a review on foreign spending.
That's right. The executive order took effect on January 24th, suspending all U.S. aid programs except for food and military aid to Egypt and Israel. The Trump administration has also moved to dismantle the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, leaving the future of U.S. foreign assistance in doubt.
The impact of the freeze of U.S. aid to the Pacific is sizable. The U.S. is, or was, the fifth largest funder of the Pacific behind Australia, China, Japan, and New Zealand. According to the Lowy Institute, the U.S. spent $3.4 billion in the Pacific Islands between 2008 and 2024. In 2022 alone, $249 million was spent on the Pacific, with a majority going to COFA states. U.S. aid to COFA states is legally mandated by Congress, and funding for the current compact agreements until 2043 was appropriated by Congress and signed into law by President Joe Biden in 2024. In exchange for this funding, the COFA states provide Washington with key security benefits, including basing access, missile defense, and other defense infrastructure in the Northern Pacific.
But even aid to COFA states has come under question. In a meeting with the embassies of Palau, the Marshall Islands, and the Federated States of Micronesia in Washington, D.C. in early February, U.S. officials from the Departments of State and Interior informed Pacific representatives that some aid programs in COFA states had already been paused. It's still unclear exactly how the aid freeze will affect COFA funding, but since these states rely on significant portions of U.S. economic assistance to fund environmental programs, climate change adaptation, healthcare, education, and infrastructure development, the funding pause could have a real impact on Pacific livelihoods.
Beyond the COFA states, the funding freeze is impacting other islands across the Pacific. In October 2024, the U.S. government opened a USAID Pacific Regional Office in Suva, Fiji, as a base for U.S. engagement in the region. The office employed over 600 Pacific workers, as well as Pacific contractors and partners. Many of these workers have now been put on leave, and a number of Americans working at the office have been recalled back to Washington. Pacific-wide programs including Climate Ready, the Pacific American Fund, the Digital Connectivity Cybersecurity Partnership, and the Pacific Regional Counter-Trafficking in Persons have been put on hold.
Health programs will also be significantly impacted by this. U.S. assistance in the Pacific funds HIV/AIDS programs and other health services in countries like Papua New Guinea and other Melanesian countries. This decrease in health funding, coupled with the spread of anti-vaccine sentiment across the Pacific, could be very dangerous for the region. In addition to Samoa's measles outbreak that we mentioned earlier, the country is also experiencing a whooping cough epidemic. Although the United States has paused many of its programs for now, other countries are continuing to provide health assistance throughout the Pacific. For instance, New Zealand has already donated 6,000 vaccine doses to combat whooping cough in Samoa.
This freeze on U.S. foreign aid leaves a large gap in the Pacific. Without the U.S. present, there is much greater risk that China will boost its economic assistance to the region. Pacific leaders will certainly be looking for other sources of funding for their countries, and without the U.S. as a reliable partner, it's possible that Pacific Island countries will turn to China to help meet their developmental needs. Beyond just U.S.-China competition, these states would lose key aid programs concerning climate change, public health, infrastructure, and education.
Meanwhile, China has been seriously increasing its spending in the Pacific in recent years. For instance, last year, China announced that it would provide a $20 million financial support package to the Solomon Islands, sending up red flags for the United States and its allies on Chinese influence in the region.
China has also now signed a series of agreements with the Cook Islands, expanding the relationship between the two countries.
The Action Plan 2025-2030 for the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Agreement expands economic and diplomatic cooperation, with the priority areas listed as economic resilience, cultural exchanges, the environment, social well-being, regional cooperation, and multilateral cooperation.
While these are broad topics, a particular area of note includes cooperation in the seabed minerals sector, which the Cook Islands has been eager to develop with its nearly 2 million square kilometer exclusive economic zone.
And this pairs with the maritime cooperation parts of the agreement, including cooperation in hydrography, maritime transport, and other maritime issues.
The countries also agreed to explore diplomatic and consular institutions in each country, as well as a flurry of cultural exchange programs.
While Prime Minister Mark Brown of the Cook Islands has defended the agreement, saying that a diverse set of relationships is needed for growth, the agreement has faced pushback from foreign and domestic audiences alike.
That's for sure. New Zealand in particular has voiced concern over the deal, as it claims the Cook Islands violated its free association agreement with New Zealand.
So John, tell me, what does the free association agreement between the two countries entail?
So, Andreyka, under the Free Association Agreement, Cook Island citizens hold New Zealand passports, use the New Zealand dollar as currency, and most importantly in this case, the two countries are required to consult with each other on security, defense, and foreign policy issues.
So when we look at the current situation, I'm guessing the Cook Islands failed to consult with New Zealand ahead of this agreement?
Precisely that. New Zealand complained about the Cook Islands' lack of openness about the details, failing to sufficiently consult Wellington. But Winston Peters, New Zealand's foreign minister, has called for a reset in relations between the two governments to avoid a situation like this happening again. So, perhaps a rapprochement could occur soon.
And this could happen rather quickly, as parts of the government and civil society have demonstrated their disapproval of the China-Cook Islands Agreement. The opposition in Parliament filed a no-confidence vote against Prime Minister Brown, which is due after February 25th.
Yes, and the public has also protested against the agreement. Hundreds gathered outside the parliament to protest the deal, as well as any plan by Prime Minister Brown, now scrapped, to ditch the New Zealand passport scheme for Cook Islanders. Protesters held signs reading "Stay connected with New Zealand" and other signage supporting the New Zealand-Cook Islands relationship.
On a related topic, New Zealand also had a diplomatic row with Kiribati, after Kiribati President Tanati Mau abruptly canceled the meeting with Foreign Minister Winston Peters. Peters was set to visit the country in January to hand over a $14 million New Zealand-funded hospital upgrade.
In a significant response to this snub, Peters announced that all New Zealand aid to Kiribati was under review. New Zealand delivered $57 million in aid from 2021 to 2024, and Kiribati is heavily dependent on foreign aid, with 18% of its total national income supported by it.
President Mau's government has shifted toward China in recent years, with Kiribati terminating diplomatic relations with Taiwan and establishing relations with the People's Republic of China in 2019.
This issue will be worth tracking. Any potential changes in New Zealand aid could push for Kiribati to engage more with China or other actors economically.
Hopping over to another archipelago, Vanuatu has elected a new prime minister, Jotham Napat. He is the country's fifth prime minister in 4 years, and will look to navigate both internal and external challenges.
His top priorities will be to form the 2025 budget and continue the ongoing rebuild in the capital, Port Vila, after the 7.3 magnitude earthquake in December.
Prime Minister Napat has also called for strengthening ties with the United States and supports increased U.S. presence and engagement in the region. He wants to push the Trump administration to rethink its approach to areas of importance in the Pacific.
Another country that has had to address its Pacific policy is France, particularly concerning its overseas territory of New Caledonia. After violent protests on the island throughout 2024 left hundreds injured and resulted in €2 billion worth of damages, the island is divided over its political future.
That's why France's Minister for Overseas, Manuel Valls, made a trip to New Caledonia on February 22nd. He met with New Caledonia political parties, both pro-independence and pro-France, for talks on an agreement that would draw a new roadmap for New Caledonia's political future, building on the existing Noumea Accord.
The Noumea Accord laid the path towards more autonomy for the island and allowed for referendums on independence. In the 3 referendums held, voters favored remaining a part of France, though all 3 referendums were boycotted by pro-independence groups.
Valls' first few days in New Caledonia were against the backdrop of rising tensions, with one main member of the pro-France faction, Nicolas Melzdorf, having a heated exchange with Valls because he mentioned the indigenous Kanak people being the first people in New Caledonia. Valls has insisted that all sides will be at the table in creating a new political pathway for the island.
Lastly, Samoan Prime Minister Fiame Naomi Mataafa survived a vote of no confidence on February 24th. She defeated the motion by 34 votes against it and 15 votes in favor. Samoa's government stated opposition's call for the vote of no confidence was another desperate attempt to stir political drama.
And that's all we have for today.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Pacific Airwaves. Let us know what you think of our coverage by writing to our main email at searadio@csis.org.
And if you're not following us already, please subscribe or give us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite streaming platform.
Our producer is Marla Hiller. Special thanks to our interns Ryan Bean, Sophia Dada, and Gemma King for their assistance with this episode. I'm John Augé.
And I'm Andreyka Natalegawa.
We'll see you next month for another episode of Pacific Airwaves.